Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Shalom and Chag Sameach Mo'adim V'Simcha. And I'm David Mencer, Israeli government spokesman. Today is Thursday, the 25th of April, 2024. Day 202 of this war started on October 7th when Hamas massacred Israelis, Jews, Muslims and Christians in an unparalleled, inhumane attack. Taking more than 250 people hostage, our war aims remain the same: to destroy Hamas's military and political capabilities, to free our 133 hostages and ensure that Gaza doesn't pose a threat to Israel and the civilized world in the future. I want to draw your attention to three important issues today. Firstly, on the global rise of Jew hatred. Yesterday evening, the Prime Minister spoke out with unprecedented comments on the rise of anti-Semitism. I will not repeat his entire comments here, which are available on his website, but I want to highlight a quote or two. The Prime Minister said, quote, "What's happening on America's college campuses is horrific. Anti-Semitic mobs have taken over leading universities. They call for the annihilation of Israel. They attack Jewish students. They attack Jewish faculty. This is reminiscent of what happened in German universities in the 1930s. It is unconscionable. It has to be stopped. It has to be condemned, and condemned unequivocally. But that's not what's happened. The response of several university presidents was shameful," end quote. The Prime Minister went on to highlight the irony that while Israel faces Iran and its terror proxies with clearly stated genocidal intent, the Prime Minister said, quote, "It is Israel that's falsely accused of genocide. Israel that is falsely accused of starvation and war crimes. It's all one big libel." The Prime Minister made a final plea to, quote, "Jews and non-Jews alike who are concerned with our common future and our common values to do one thing: to stand up, to speak up, to be counted, to stop anti-Semitism now." Next, on the UNRWA-Hamas link, which was downplayed in the recent Colona report at the United Nations, we would like to draw your attention to the following points. The Gaza operation over the last 202 days, over 6 months, has revealed a wealth of new intelligence gleaned from millions of confiscated documents. First, the involvement of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, employees in the October 7th massacre. Second, the deep and systemic infiltration by those terror organizations, particularly Hamas, into the ranks of UNRWA. Now, these documents reveal that a significant share of UNRWA's employees in Gaza serve in the ranks of Hamas and other terror organizations. Almost 500 of them in military positions, at least 18 school principals, the most trusted, amongst the most trusted people in society, school principals in Gaza, members of Hamas's military wing. Over 30 UNRWA facilities have been found to contain terror infrastructures such as tunnel shafts. We've already shared this with you, but Hamas operated a high-end server farm directly under UNRWA's Gaza headquarters with communication and electricity cables connecting both compounds. Look, this point has to be made and cannot be made often enough. It is not a case of a few rotten apples, as the Colona report makes clear. It is a huge, rotten Hamas orchard. Israel provided UNRWA with information on members of Hamas that are employed by the agency before October the 7th, but no action was ever taken. We have shared this with UNRWA's High Commissioner, Philip Lazzarini, and with the Secretary General, and the former French Foreign Minister, Catherine Colona. The often repeated claim that Israel did not share information on the UNRWA-Hamas nexus is entirely false. The very fact that this compelling evidence, literally a smoking Hamas gun, has been so downplayed proves that UNRWA in Gaza is beyond repair, like an alcoholic that refuses to believe he has a problem. Here are more compelling points. Unlike most of the donor governments, UNRWA, like the UN itself, does not regard Hamas as a terrorist organization. Let me repeat that UNRWA and the UN does not regard Hamas as a terrorist organization. Unbelievable. This is not the case for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. As recently as February 2024, UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, proudly stated that Hamas is not a terrorist group for us. As you know, it's a political movement. I think the victims of October the 7th would beg to differ. All of this is bad enough, but how's this for incompetence and inefficiency? For a period of 6 weeks in February and March 2024, this year, UNRWA didn't make a single request, not a single request, to take aid to the north of Gaza where it was needed most, failing in its duty. Instead, the food relief was brought by other actors such as the private sector and other UN agencies and international NGOs. Look, reforms will not change the basic fact that UNRWA in Gaza is the only UN entity in the world which runs a state-like enterprise, employing 13,000 local staff members, managed by a small number of international staff in an area controlled by a terrorist organization with a genocidal agenda. Israel believes that UNRWA must be replaced in Gaza without hampering the humanitarian effort. And now a final point. Hamas terrorists running Gaza have repeatedly demonstrated that it prioritizes terror over the well-being of Gazan civilians. It exploits them as human shields and views a humanitarian crisis as an integral part of their war strategy. We believe that, unfortunately, the UN's and UNRWA's leadership have chosen to understate the severity of this unprecedented scandal, leading to what might go down as one of the biggest whitewashes in the history of the United Nations. International governments seeking to build up life for ordinary Gazans, for more schools, for more hospitals, for better roads, for better infrastructure, a future for Gazans to build on, must not fall back into the lying arms of UNRWA. Finally, for an update from COGAT, which coordinates humanitarian aid into Gaza, 352 aid trucks went into Gaza yesterday. 7 trucks via the fence road to northern Gaza, 16 trucks via the Jordanian route, and 12 trucks through Ashdod port. 104 pallets were airdropped over northern Gaza. And finally, we say to UNRWA's High Commissioner, Philip Lazzarini, who yesterday finally recognized only 310 trucks entering Gaza. Philip, why can't you just tell the truth? Just in the week of October 7th, an average of 350 trucks entered Gaza daily. Those 310 trucks you refer to have been sitting inside Gaza for days, waiting for your employees to collect them. So that's the end of our briefing today. I will now happily take your questions, which you should put in the chat with your news outlet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First question from Joe Polak, Breitbart News. Is the Israeli government disappointed that President Biden appeared to equivocate on the anti-Semitism on U.S. college campuses by saying that he condemned those who did not understand the protesters?
So That sounds like a question for President Biden himself. All of us here in Israel are very, very clear that unfortunately these marches for Palestinians have unfortunately in the majority of cases been marches of Jew hate. They've been marches in favor of Hamas, sadly. There haven't been marches in favor of coexistence or of bringing people together or of an end to violence or of calling for the release of our 133 hostages. We haven't seen that in any of those marches. Those marches have been quite clear. I think governments around the world have come to the understanding that these aren't peaceful protests. These are, unfortunately, in the majority of cases, Hamas supporting protests, and they must be stood up to. Thank you. Next question, please.
Second question from Joel Pollack. Did Hamas's video of Hirsch Goldberg backfire by giving new hope to Israelis that the hostages are still alive and might be rescued or freed?
Thank you for that question, Joel. We won't be commenting on Hamas's further attempt at psychological warfare. It's psychological torture, not only for the poor hostages who are held in the Hamas terror dungeons, but it's psychological torture for their parents and their families and their friends and all of us here in Israel. It is psychological torture. There's no other word for it. I think that the overwhelming image which I'm left with is the dignity of that poor boy's parents, John and Rachel, the way that they held themselves, the dignity with which they have continued to fight for the release of their son together with their son Hirsch, together with all of the hostages. I think that's the overwhelming message, the only overwhelming feeling which Israelis will come away with. But let's not share that video. Let's not give any victory to Hamas's psychological terror on people here, on all right-thinking people here. This is a dastardly act. All of these hostages must be released right now. And I think it's very important to be clear, as Secretary of State Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has said extremely clearly, you cannot doubt, it is Hamas that is dragging their feet. It is Hamas that continues to walk away from the table. It is Hamas that refuses to let our people go. They must be let go right now. Thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you. Question from Jim Williams, Zenger News. How recent does the government feel the video of Hirsch Goldberg Poland might be?
Thank you very much for that question, Jim. So, as with all questions of the hostages, lives hang in the balance. Lives literally hang in the balance. So we won't be revealing any of our intelligence on those videos. But I say again, as I said in my previous message, I would point you to the dignity of Hirsch's parents, John and Rachel, who can not help but be moved by the way which they have held themselves and campaigned for the release of their son. Next question, please.
Question from Fred Eager, Interplanetary Television. Certain Hamas officials claim that they will disarm Hamas's military arm if Israel agrees to a return of pre-1967 borders. Do you confirm the validity of such statement, and what is your response?
Thank you, Fred, for that question. The only thing that we know which has been effective with Hamas is harsh military pressure, harsh military offensives. That's what got our initial more than 110 hostages released in the initial round of hostage releases. Look, Hamas is a dastardly terrorist organization whose charter very clearly states that it wants to annihilate Israel. I would simply point you to the fact that the War Cabinet meets right now to discuss how to destroy the last vestiges, the last quarter of Hamas's battalions in Rafah and elsewhere in Gaza. They're meeting right now. They're feeling the pressure, and what a surprise, they're starting to make pseudo-conciliatory remarks. We're not going to fall for it. I don't think anyone in the world would fall for it. This is a genocidal, murderous organization, and there is only one answer to tyrants and terrorism. They must be defeated. This country will defeat the final vestiges of Hamas in Gaza. We will bring back our hostages. We will destroy Hamas both politically and militarily, and we will ensure that Hamas and Gaza never ever poses a threat to our civilization, but to any civilization ever again. Next question, please.
Question from Pierre Human, Swiss Weekly. The UN says that Israel has not presented proof for the Hamas connection. Has Israel presented any proof for that link, and which proof has it delivered?
Thank you very much for that question, Philippa. I'm not clear which connection, which Hamas connection you are thinking of. Is there anything else in the question that would point to which Hamas question?
To UNRWA.
Hamas to UNRWA. Well, Philippe, I think that you do need a strong pair of glasses if you can't see the link between Hamas and UNRWA. Just the simple fact that, underneath UNRWA's headquarters in Gaza was a Hamas server farm, a computer server farm, where they fed electricity from and where there were cables going between the two buildings. We know that Hamas employees, teachers for heaven's sake, took part in the massacre of October the 7th. I provided many links today in my briefing about the Hamas UNRWA connection. We just can't. All of us here in Israel are at a loss to understand how anyone can think there is any possible future for an organization like UNRWA, which is just a front for Hamas. I think with the best will in the world, if you want a better future for Palestinians, not the future not the past which they've had since 1948, if you want a more sustainable future for the ordinary Gazans, not for Hamas, if you want a better future for the younger people, for them to have something to look forward to protect their lives, to build their lives, to better themselves, then, thinking that UNRWA is part of that resolution is just ridiculous. UNRWA have kept Palestinians in Gazans as victims. They've kept them downtrodden. They've filled their heads with ridiculous lies of returning to Haifa and Jaffa here in Israel and retaking the land of Israel. These are ridiculous fallacies. It's time to face up to the truth. Israelis overwhelmingly want to live in peace with all of their neighbors here, and I'm sure that Gazans must want the same thing, but they must be offered a better future, and UNRWA is part of its past, its destructive past, its terrorist-linked past, and we will no longer be able to live in a world with Hamas umbilically linked with UNRWA. That's no way for a sustainable future, and we will not have it. Thank you. Next question, please.
Question from Wire Davies, BBC News. It's all gone relatively quiet on the ceasefire talks front. As far as Israel is concerned, are those talks in effect or in danger of collapse or even over?
Thank you, Wira, for that question. I would simply point you to the fact, to Secretary of State Blinken's comments, the US Secretary of State, where he points the blame completely and solely at the feet of Hamas. They walk away from any potential deal, even though Israel has really gone to extreme efforts to try and get our people home. It is Hamas which walks away. And I'll tell you, Wira, another thing, that part of the reason why that Hamas are emboldened is because they see those protests on the streets of London. They see press coverage which parrots Hamas talking points in an unquestioning manner. They are emboldened by other players in the region which seek to attack Israel. And that is why they keep walking away. When there are resolutions in the United Nations, which unfortunately were abstained by the US, that emboldens Hamas. They've said it quite clearly when we've been on the brink of a potential deal, when Hamas see that there is this international support. And you hear this from Iranian spokespeople as well. You hear this very, very clearly. They are emboldened, they are empowered by these pro-Hamas marches around the world. We must stand up to this hatred, because we here in Israel understand that we're on the front line of this battle against civilization, this battle for democracy, this battle for freedom of religion, freedom of lifestyle, freedom, all the freedoms which we work hard to protect in Western democracies. Those are the freedoms which Hamas hate. We must stand up to their hatred. But I'll say once again that Israel will do whatever it can diplomatically to get our people home. Next question, please.
Question from Dan Williams, Reuters. Is the War Cabinet due to decide today on the authorization of the Rafa operation?
Thank you, Dan, for that question. The War Cabinet's discussions are ongoing. They've been ongoing since this morning, and they'll continue later today, and that's all that we can say on this matter. Thank you. Next question, please.
No further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us here today. We'll have our next briefing on Monday. In the meantime, please stay safe, and thank you for joining us. Thank you. Bye-bye.